I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 2, Sunday, June 13th, 2021. The lesson is entitled Gideon Destroys Baal's Altar. Lesson text comes from Judges chapter 6, verses 25 through 32. Related scriptures are Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 6, Exodus 34, 10 through 14, 1 Kings 18, 17 through 39. The place is Ophrah. The time is 1191 BC. Perhaps you have found yourself in a position where you knew God was with you, yet you were still afraid. You believe all things are possible with God, and you rehearsed all the scriptures that promise his protection and provision, but you still were afraid something might go terribly wrong. If you have ever experienced that, you are definitely not alone. Even some of the greatest heroes in the Bible had the same experience. The key to being faithful is not necessarily being fearless. It is trusting God to accomplish great things through you and going forward in spite of nagging doubts in your mind. Satan certainly tries to prey on our human weakness and convince us that we are doomed to fail if we try to do what God has called us to do. It is a battle within the battle. God is not looking for people who are absolutely free of fear and doubt. He is looking for people who will trust him in spite of them. Today's aim, facts, to show that God is not looking for the strongest or bravest people in the world. Principle, to acknowledge that God can use even the weakest person who is willing to let God work in his or her life. Application, to be assured that if we will trust God in spite of our fears and misgivings, he will do great things in our lives. Illustrating the lesson. Turning away from God brings destruction and hardship, but turning to him brings blessing, protection, and provision. Practical points. 1. Obeying God may require bold and risky action, Judges 6:25. 2. Consistent worship keeps our focus and commitment firmly centered on the Lord, verse 26. 3. God provides the support and resources needed to carry out his commands and fulfill his mission in the world, verse 27. 4. To follow the world's lead is to become God's enemy, verses 28 through 29. 5. God never fails to show himself strong on behalf of one who trusts in him, verses 30 through 31. 6. God gives victory to those who believe his promises and obey his commands, verses 32. Golden text. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Deuteronomy 7:6. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is the assignment, coming from Judges 6:25 through 26. The second is the action, coming from Judges 6:27. The third is the aftermath, Judges 6:28 through 32. Introduction. What does a hero look like? Most of us probably think of someone who boldly does brave and dramatic deeds in public. Snatching a child from a burning building, driving into a raging river to save a drowning victim, or standing up alone in a town hall meeting to expose entrenched corruption. But many heroes, even today, do not fit this picture. We all know or have heard of quiet heroes who act in the background and receive little attention. Heroes, in brief, can be found in unlikely packages. One such unlikely package was Gideon. Hebrews 11:32 lists him among the heroes of the faith, but he did not possess many of the characteristics we normally associate with heroes. He was timid, unsure of himself, and repeatedly in need of reassurance. Still, he mustered the faith to do what the Lord commanded him, and it was a key step in a much larger calling, the assignment, Judges 6:25. And it came to pass that same night that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it. Verse 26. And build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place, and take the second bullock and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. Our text this week is something of an interlude, sandwiched between two much better known or more frequently studied accounts. The call of Gideon to deliver Israel from the Midianites, Judges 6:11-24, and the dramatic vanishing of the vast Midianite army, 7:9-25. The action in our present passage is preparatory to the main event that follows, but it is a crucial step. When the angel of the Lord, a physical manifestation of the Lord himself, delivered the commission to fight the Midianites, he had to overcome Gideon's extreme doubt and hesitation. The angel accomplished this by consuming a sacrifice with a fiery burst, 6:21, and then assuring Gideon that he was in good standing, verses 22-23. Gideon then built an altar, verse 24, tentatively accepting the commission, it would seem. God knew, however, that Gideon, a humble resident of Ophrah, verses 11-24, was not yet ready to take on the daunting task of leading an army against the enemy hordes. Significant preparation was required to bolster Gideon's courage and, more importantly, build his faith in the one who had called him and would be with him in this enterprise. So God started him off with a much smaller but nonetheless intimidating assignment. Purge the evil, Judges 6:25. The Lord did not waste any time getting Gideon started on his training. The very night he spoke to him and set before him his first task. He was to take a young bull from his father's herd, the second best one, in fact, even the second bullock of 7 years. A 7-year-old animal would be in its prime and thus represent a significant sacrifice. As Gideon listened, he may have fleetingly thought, so far so good, but he would have surely sensed that this was merely the first step. The main task was about to be revealed, and it must have sent a shiver down his spine. Tear down your father's altar to the Canaanite god Baal and cut down the Asher pole standing next to it. That was not going to be easy. That Gideon's father had a Baal altar on his property is a sad commentary on how far the people of Israel had already drifted from fidelity to the Lord. Baal worship was a key element of the evil that had brought on the Midianite oppression, verse 1. And while we might be surprised to find evidence of idolatry in Gideon's own family, it may have been a contributing factor to the spiritual paralysis he felt in accepting the Lord's commission, verse 15. This idolatry was indeed a hindrance that needed to be overcome before Gideon could make further progress. Baal altars were often built in company with cult objects called Asherah poles, already translated grove in the King James Version. An Ashu pole was a sacred pole or sometimes a tree that was used in the worship of the pagan goddess Asherah. What was an Asherah pole? Asherah was considered a fertility goddess and was probably also the one called the Queen of Heaven. Jeremiah 7:18, 44:17-19, 25. The worship before such objects was blasphemous and immoral. Deuteronomy 7:5 commanded the conquering Israelites to break down all pagan altars and cut down all Asherah poles found in the land. That command, sadly, had been fragrantly spurned. Gideon was now assigned to rectify his people's disobedience by carrying out both of these ordinances in the particular instance of his own family's lapse. Promote true worship. Judges 6:26. The second part of Gideon's task was to build an altar to the Lord, an altar for true worship. Baal altars were typically built on high ground, and it appears that Gideon was to build the Lord's altar on the same elevated location the Baal altar had occupied. Upon the top of this rock, once the proper altar was built in the ordered place, suggests carefully laying the stones in the prescribed fashion. He was to sacrifice the young bull on it, burning the offering on the wood from the cut down Asherah pole. The action, verse 27. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. The task Gideon was given represented a considerable amount of work, clearly too much for one man to accomplish in a short time. Gideon therefore selected 10 household servants and set about carrying out the Lord's instructions. Even with 10 men surrounding him, however, he was afraid of what his family and the men of Ophrah would do. So he did the work at night. Gideon fulfilled the task, but he was still a long way from conquering his fear. Gideon apparently performed the task the following night after the Lord had spoken to him. Presumably, the normal time to carry out divine instructions given at night was in the morning. Genesis 22, 1 through 3. Gideon likely would have recruited the 10 assistants in the morning, but then waited till nightfall to do the actual work. He and his men were able to finish it undisturbed, but the next day's event showed that Gideon had good reason for his trepidation. Does Gideon deserve criticism for giving in to his fear of the people around him and doing the job under the cover of darkness? We might assume that a public sin such as Baal worship should be confronted by a public refutation. A public destruction of an affront to the Lord's honor and covenant might have afforded the opportunity for an open call to repentance and cleansing. Gideon's method seems more in accord with setting a candle under a bushel rather than out in the open, Matthew 5:15. Certainly, the biblical writer's mention of his fear is not offered as a recommendation. But if a criticism is warranted, due credit is equally not to be withheld. Gideon may have carried out the assignment at night because of fear, but the more important fact is that he did carry it out. He obeyed God's instructions, and he did not shortchange any element of those instructions. And he surely calculated that if he had tried to do it in broad daylight, he would have encountered immediate interference from the whole town. He might even have been killed on the spot. With the idolatrous altar left standing, its unlawfulness uncontested. Gideon also must have reckoned that the cover of darkness would not shield him from eventual danger. He was subject to fears, but he was not a coward. If he had been, he would not have gone through with the task, or he might have left town immediately after, never to return. As future events revealed, Gideon's seemingly cowardly act might have been an entirely reasonable and prudent course of action. The aftermath. Verse 28. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. Verse 29. And then said one to another, who have done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, have done this thing. Verse 30. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he have cast down the altar of Baal, and because he have cut down the grove that is by it. Verse 31. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, Will ye plead for Baal? Will ye save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death whilst it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one have cast down his altar. Verse 32. Therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying that Baal plead against him, because he have thrown down his altar. Angry investigation. Judges 6:28 through 29. The feared reaction was not long in coming. Early in the morning, the deed was discovered. The Baal altar and Asher pole was gone, and a new altar stood on the spot. Upon that new altar were the remains of a sacrifice. An investigation was launched immediately. Who have done this thing? The impression we are given is of a whole town in uproar, with everyone shouting the question to everyone else at once. Who indeed could possibly have had the motive and ability to penetrate such a heinous act? More disciplined inquiries were then made, and soon the finger of accusation pointed to Gideon, the son of Joash. It is a further sad commentary on the darkened spiritual awareness among the people of Israel that such anger and consternation are not recorded regarding the neglect of the true worship of God. These people reacted violently only when their idolatry and false worship were threatened. Their hearts were given to Baal worship, and they were furious that anyone would raise a hand against it. Demand for retribution. Judges 6:30. Hand him over was the cry that went up. The whole town of Ophrah, all the men of the city, descended on Joash's house and demanded that he turn his son Gideon over to them for punishment. It was a lynch mob, and nothing less than Gideon's immediate death would appease them. They thought they were fully justified in such a demand, for Gideon had destroyed what evidently was of supreme value and importance, the altar of Baal and its Asher pole. Would Joash respond as Lot once had and cravenly seek to appease the crowd? Genesis 19:4 through 8. Or would he stand his ground? We see that Gideon was not the only one put to a test on this occasion. A spirited defense. Judges 6:31 through 32. To his great credit, Joash did not allow himself to be cowed by the fury of the mob. Whatever culpability he may have borne for having had a Baal altar on his property, he now saw things clearly. Baal was not worth shredding anyone's blood over, not to mention his own sons. Joash therefore answered the angry crowd with great courage, leavened by a healthy dose of keen irony. He began by insisting that the people take a hard look at what they were doing. Why are you defending Baal? Is the essence of his first question. They needed to consider why they were even on Baal's side. They were Israelites, people who were in the land by the grace and intervention of the Lord. Why would they even think of taking up the cause of Baal? Joash's questions became pointed. Will ye save him? Verse 31. Did they think that by taking the action they were bent on, they were actually preserving the life and power of their precious idol? Joash answered his own question by bluntly insisting, let him plead for himself. If any action was to be taken against the person who destroyed Baal's altar, Baal should be the one to do it. If Baal was as great as they seemed to think, then he should be well able to defend his assaulted honor himself. Between Joash's opening questions and his conclusion is a somewhat more puzzling statement, at least to those of us far removed from the event. let him be put to death whilst it is yet morning. The most likely meaning is that in Joash's view, the people should let Baal do his own avenging, and anyone who took the matter on himself should himself be put to death. Joash seems to imply that they were in danger of encroaching on Baal's honor by usurping a task that should be his alone. These words remind us of another confrontation between proponents of Baal and a lone defender of true worship. Almost 350 years after the mob scene in Ophrah, the prophet Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal and the wavering Israelites to let Baal make good on his claim over them. 1 Kings 18:21 through 24. It may be that Elijah had Joash's challenge in the back of his mind when he proposed his contest. In any case, he had full confidence that Baal would be found completely wanting, while the Lord would faithfully reveal his power and glory. How confident was Joash that Baal would prove himself impotent? Was Joash not a Baal worshiper himself? Perhaps he was a worshiper of Baal, but just not a very committed one. We do not know whether he put up the altar on his property himself or merely acquiesced to his construction by others. Still, we might expect that such a man would at least entertain the possibility of retribution by Baal against the destroyer of his altar. It seems likely, then, that Gideon's act of faith stirred his father's conscience and awakened his spirit to the emptiness and evil of idolatry. If so, then the Lord had already scored an opening victory in his work with Gideon. The agitated men of Ophrah had no answer for Joash. At least none is recorded, and no harm came to Gideon. In fact, instead of being dragged out to an ignominious death at the hands of his fellow townsmen, Gideon found that his reputation had been given a significant boost as a result of the confrontation. From that day forward, he had a new nickname, Jerubbaal. Verse 32 translate this as let Baal plead against him, or alternatively, let Baal defend himself. Today we might more loosely render it as Baal crusher. Through all this, Gideon carried out a risky mission for the Lord and experienced his faithfulness both in enabling him to see it through and in protecting him from the expected consequences. We know from what comes later in the episode of the fleece that Gideon still was not confident of his calling from God, verses 36 through 40. The Lord's unexpected hero would still need more preparation and encouragement, but he had overcome a major hurdle in the power of the Lord. Questions. 1. What was the first thing Gideon was to do? 2. What was the main task set before Gideon? 3. What was the grove or Asherah pole? Judges 6:25. 4. What was Gideon to do after the initial task of dismantling the forbidden objects? 5. Why did Gideon carry out his assignment at night? 6. What was the reaction of the townspeople of the destruction of Baal's altar? 7. What punishment did they want to inflict on Gideon? 8. What pointed question did Joash pose to the angry crowd? 9. How did Joash answer his own question? 10. What was the immediate result of this confrontation for Gideon? This concludes the lesson for Sunday, June 13th, 2021. Thank you for listening. God bless.